You are listening to the Keep the Weight Off podcast with Dr. Angela, episode number 96.
Welcome to the Keep the Weight Off podcast, where we bust all the dieting myths and discover not just how to lose weight, but more importantly, how to keep it off. We go way beyond the food, and we use science and psychology to give you strategies that work. And now your host, Dr. Angela Zechmann.
All right, so welcome to this week's podcast. So excited to be here with you this week. How are you, Marchelle?
I am doing wonderful. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Okay, so this is going to be a great podcast because Marchelle came to me and she said, Angela, there's something I think we need to talk about on the podcast. And it's something I really want to take the lead on. And I'm like, ooh, this is good. I don't have to do any planning because I said, absolutely, you go for it. You take the lead on it. And so, Marchelle, what is it that you wanted to talk about on this week's podcast? I'm really curious.
Okay. All right. So this is my story of myself. But if it sounds a little scripted, it's because I wrote it all down, and I'm going to be reading it because I didn't want to leave anything out. So, so here it goes. Something that I've been wanting to talk about for a while. The reason why I wanted to talk about this is because it's a mistake that I made a little while back in my weight loss journey. So I wanted to share it with everybody because it's been on my mind.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to talk about is goal weight, quote unquote, goal weight.
Goal weight.
Goal weight. So I've spent most of my life talking about losing weight and hoping to reach what I call was my goal weight. I never really thought about what would actually happen when I got there. And I don't think that I even considered that reaching my goal weight was a real possibility. So, so a little over a year ago, I was already feeling empowered and I had some tools and skills. I was about a year into my weight loss journey, if you remember that. My husband and I were planning a wonderful vacation to Mexico for my 50th birthday and our son's high school graduation. You remember that?
Yep.
Yeah. So I wanted to feel comfortable in a bathing suit. So that's when that's when I really kicked things into gear.
Yeah.
And I worked really hard. And by the time that we left for vacation, I had reached what I called my goal weight. I'm not going to give any numbers because, that's not the important part of this story. I was just really proud of myself. And I was at a place where I just felt really comfortable and, really good in my own skin. And then I bought that bathing suit. So,
okay.
And then I went to Mexico. So
all's well. So far, so good.
Right. So everything's great at this point, right? And so we went to this fantastic all-inclusive resort and it had about 11 restaurants and then all the beverages, adult and otherwise that you could think of.
Yeah.
And during that vacation, my brain did something kind of crazy. And I felt like I had a little bit of wiggle room, and I gave myself permission to splurge. And you and I had talked about splurging. And and I told myself, that I was only going to splurge during the vacation. Okay. And, and I went in with some really good intentions. I did have a plan. I wasn't going to go all out. I was going to do what you talked about before. Like if you're going to splurge, do it on the last day. But then they had this wonderful breakfast buffet. And I would go in saying, okay, I'm going to do all protein because you could have anything you want. I mean, it was like the best buffet I've ever seen in my life. It just went on for miles, it seemed like. And I would go in there and, with the best of intentions. And then I would walk down the little aisle there and I'd be like, oh, but they have French toast. I haven't had that in a year. So, so I just got really distracted. But I just kept telling myself okay, it's my birthday. It's okay. I'm just going to do it for now. So the vacation, of course, was wonderful. And then when I got back, I fell right into a trap. And I call that relaxation. That's my word. Oh, relaxation.
Okay.
So, so how that played out is if I was at a party and they were serving hamburgers, I wouldn't bother to take off the bun. Or if I was at a family gathering or a birthday party, I would have that piece of birthday cake. I was still on track with meals, but I started giving myself more leeway with the rules.
Okay.
And then my sugar cravings started to creep back in and I couldn't stand it. Donuts started talking to me again. I was stopping by the store and getting snacks that I shouldn't eat. It was just it happened so fast, Angela, that I didn't even know what was happening. It just before I knew it, just didn't feel good. My
Yeah.
pants started to fit tighter. I'd wake
Yeah.
up with achy muscles, sore back. And I just felt really disappointed in myself because, I knew that I was gaining, some of that weight back. Nobody really noticed, nobody said anything to me. I just sort of like suffered in silence for a while. And
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't know what to do because I just didn't want to talk about it to anybody because I felt ashamed, which is the thing you don't do. If you're feeling like something's going on with your weight loss journey, please
Mm-hmm.
talk about it to somebody, because I wish that I would have talked about it with you sooner than I did. And,
Yeah.
but I mean, I also didn't want to stop eating sugar at that time too. So
Right.
my brain,
Exactly.
my brain was doing bad things at that time. So yeah. So then, it took me a little while, but then I remembered that I had tools.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to you about how
Mm-hmm.
I was feeling, and you reassured me. And
Yeah.
then, I had to wean myself off of sugar again and get back following the rules. And now I feel
Mm-hmm.
great. But
Awesome.
I think it was important for me to share some of my mistakes, or it is important for me to share some of my mistakes that I made along the way, because I think it can help some of you, maybe some of our
Mm-hmm.
listeners.
Mm-hmm.
But just remember that goal weights are not important. That's what the takeaway
Yeah.
that I want from this story.
I totally agree with you. And I'm gonna give you my thoughts on this, but I have a really quick question for you because
Mm-hmm.
you used some words that I want to delve into a little bit more. So you said you wanted to look good in a bathing suit. And so that's what really kicked things into gear for you. Can you tell me what that means in terms of what your behaviors were during that time where you were really focused on?
I was really strict with not eating sugar and flour and getting enough
Uh-huh.
protein in and
Mm-hmm.
enough water. And I mean, because
Mm-hmm.
like I said, I already was a year into, my weight loss journey. So I
Mm-hmm.
knew, because before I wasn't quite so diligent. I mean, like I did really well, and I would stay under, the 5 teaspoons per meal, but I wasn't completely off of sugar.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I was able to pull that off, for a while. But when when I
Mm-hmm.
had like this short period of time to really prepare to go on this trip, is when I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so I'm going to do everything that I possibly can to get to this goal weight. It was so weird. Like this number played out in my
Mm-hmm.
mind over and over and over again. And I was trying to hit this number. And like I said, I don't
Yeah.
want to tell you what the number is, because my number is going to be different than your number.
No, it
And,
doesn't matter.
everyone,
Yeah.
it's not just, there is no magic number that means all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden, you have arrived. I just,
Right.
for me, and I see it all the time in the clinic, that
Mm-hmm.
people, and I, and now that I've gone through this, I often ask people, do you have a number in your mind? Is that a goal for you? Because I really want people to understand that it is not important, and to not focus on the scale. And you and I have done podcasts about it, but this,
Mm-hmm.
it's just something that really tripped me up, and I was really struggling for a long time over it. And
Yeah.
even I still do, because I still like have this thing, this voice in the back of my head saying, like, you're disappointed yourself, like you messed up, like you were there and now you're not there anymore. Because I never did go back to that number. I'm at a
Mm-hmm.
number that I've stayed at, for about 6 months now. And that's kind of where
Mm-hmm.
my body has landed. And
Mm-hmm.
I just have to accept that, but it's not the number that I wanted. So, like
Mm.
I said, so
Okay.
sometimes, in my head, my brain is telling me like, you could have been here, or
Right.
you could have done this, but you messed
Mm-hmm.
up. So I have to fight
Oh,
that and just not
yeah.
focus on that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So
So, yeah.
you're really recognizing the way your brain is talking to you. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Ugh.
Yeah. So it sounds like then when you were saying that when you were trying to prepare for this trip and you had this number in your head and you were being super, super strict with yourself, your mindset was, well, I'm going to deprive myself for a little while so that I can get to this goal.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I was curious about
Yep.
because the same thing happened to me. Okay.
Oh.
And so you're not alone here, really. This is what happens to almost everybody. And so I was doing a figure competition. And so I was going to be standing on a stage in front of people and they were going to be judging me. And so I had very specific and very strict rules and regulations about what I could eat and what I couldn't eat and what time I was supposed to eat. And I mean, it was
Oh man, there's so
insanity.
much pressure there. My
It
goodness, I
was
couldn't imagine that kind of pressure.
it was like 13 weeks of insanity just
Right.
to get the idea was to get the fat off of you, work really hard in training, build all these muscles up. And then for the last 13 weeks, you diet the fat off. So then all that shows is the muscle. And of course, this was 20 years ago. I mean, there's no way in heck I would ever consider, I never recommend anybody ever doing this, but lots of people still do it. But
Well, just
it's
for
like
the record, you guys, she is still beautiful. Very, very beautiful. Just want everyone to know that.
Thank you.
Doesn't matter if it's 20 years later. You're gorgeous.
Thank you. Well, it's just it was a crazy period of time. And so what happens to us when we do that really restrictive stuff to try to get to a certain body shape or goal weight or whatever it is we rebound later. Okay. So here's what I think about this whole concept of a goal weight. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. I'm actually going to be even a little bit more polarizing and say I despise it. I despise the idea of thinking about goal weights. And this is one of those dieting concepts that I just take serious issues with. And so I want to explain why. So here's what happens for people. And again, remember, it happened for me too. There are several different things that can happen. The first is what I call dieting for a deadline. So that's what I was doing with the figure competition. That's what you were doing with your 50th birthday vacation. And people have all kinds of reasons for wanting to lose weight. So for many of our patients and clients, maybe it's a wedding and maybe they're getting married. And so they're trying to lose weight for their wedding day. Or maybe they're the mother of the bride or the mother of the groom, and they're trying to make sure that they look good for the wedding pictures. Or maybe it's a class reunion or a family reunion of some sort of event that we're trying to get the weight off and look good for. Okay. So some sort of external event. And it's interesting. I was just thinking about the pandemic because, there were a couple of years that we didn't have these events happening, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
We didn't have that motivation to keep our weight in check. And so I wonder how many people just sort of said, I don't have to worry about it. I'm just going to give myself the leeway. I'm not seeing anybody anyway. This is boring sitting here at home. I'm just going to eat, and so I don't know. I think that's a possibility. One of the possible reasons why people may have put extra weight on during the pandemic. There were a lot of reasons for it, but that might have been one of them. So, because remember, our primitive brains are always looking for some sort of excuse to get the dopamine hit, right?
Oh, yeah.
They're
It was like the perfect storm. Like,
Yeah.
you couldn't go to the gym,
Yeah.
but you could go to the store and buy booze and food.
Exactly.
And, people, that was a whole, we had so many new patients. I remember after the quarantine, even older patients that we hadn't seen that were coming in. I mean, we didn't even have like enough room on our schedule after the quarantine. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah. Yeah. It was insanity.
People wanting to come in and see you. Yeah. It was a really rough time on everybody.
Yeah. So if you think about it, our primitive brains are looking for ways to get their dopamine hits. And so one of the things that happens after we've been restricting for so long, to diet down for a deadline is our primitive brains are like, they take a big breather and they're like, okay, I don't have to work so hard anymore. And biggest excuse is I've just been depriving myself. So now it's time to let go. And that's what happened to you. That's what happened to me. That's what happens to a lot of people. So we have this tendency to use extreme willpower and deprivation for a short period of time in order to get to a certain goal weight by a certain time. And so remember, we talked recently about BJ Fogg's research on behavior change. And he talked about how the more motivation something takes, the less likely we're going to be able to do it for long periods of time, right? So
it's true.
So when we're having to use this much motivation because things are so hard, it's nearly impossible to keep it up for any length of time. And we're pretty much guaranteed to put the weight back on later, which is what happened to me and what happened to you and what happens to almost everybody. So that's the first reason I hate goal weights. I hate this idea of dieting down to a certain goal weight by a certain deadline. I hate the idea of goal weights in general. It's never going to work long term. It's just not. And this is called the Keep the Weight Off podcast, not the Get the Weight Off for a Certain Deadline podcast, right?
Yeah. And it's so like of all people, I work side by side with you. I feel like I should have known this But I don't know why I was so fixated on this number. And it's so hard for me to let go of that. It just is. I'm not going to lie. It's hard.
Let me explain something to you. And here is what it is. Words don't teach. You can hear me say things all day, every day, but until you actually experience it yourself, that's when you really learn it. Okay? So you heard me say over and over again, goal weights aren't important. Your weight doesn't matter. Over and over and over again. But until you actually went through this and you experienced it yourself, that's when you really learned it. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So that's why. So don't beat yourself up about, gosh, I work side by side with you. I should have known better. No, you shouldn't have, because you hadn't experienced it yet. You just had heard the words. So, okay?
Okay. Well, I'm going to forgive myself then.
Yes, do forgive yourself.
All right.
All of you podcast listeners, I am, listen to this now, and then after you experience it, come back and listen to it again.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I have 2 more reasons why I absolutely despise the idea of goal weight. Do you want to hear what they are?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Well, what I know about lasting weight loss is that there needs to be an identity shift. So what does that mean? So what's our identity? Our identity is the thoughts that we think about ourselves, right? So in order to lose weight and keep it off, there has to be an identity shift about who I am and how I nourish my body and how I take care of myself. So I had to realize that processed food is toxic. And I had to develop this new identity that says, I'm a healthy person and I do not eat processed food. I have developed this identity, right? It's very focused on living a healthy life in a world in which no one else seems to care until they get really sick. They don't really care about their health. So for example, you can't force me to eat at McDonald's or Burger King or Pizza Hut. Like, no, it goes completely against how I think about myself as a healthy person. So I don't ever have to deprive myself of this stuff. The idea of eating that stuff actually makes my stomach churn. So do you see the difference, Marchelle? Does that make sense?
It does. I love hearing you say this. I've heard you say it before. It's just really super inspiring. I love when you talk about this.
Yeah, I think about those types of foods in the same way I think about cigarettes. Like, no, no, it's toxic and it's going to kill me, right? So
yeah, it's the same way. So if I'm going to break in for a second here. Sorry.
Yeah, of course.
So it's the same way for me when we first started doing these podcasts, and I did, I told you about the coffee, living on the coffee and the creamer. And I mean, that was my life, right? I don't even drink coffee now. As a matter of fact, I don't even drink caffeine. Or eat caffeine. Like I don't. Yeah. So that's because for some reason, my brain accepted that it was toxic for me and I didn't like the way I felt on it. And, I recognized that once I got off of it, then I realized how crappy it was making me feel. And so that's sort of, what fast food is to you. It's like, that's how I feel about caffeine. Now, sugar, on the other hand, I'm still fighting with that. But it's a work in progress.
Yeah. Well, how this works for me is if I go to a party and there's a bunch of processed food there, which sometimes there is, I'm always going to bring something nourishing for myself and for others. And I'm not going to touch the chips or the buns or the cookies or the cake, usually, right? Cake is, of course, my favorite thing. So I'm really deliberate about it and I plan ahead. And I treat it almost like you would treat dynamite. Like, if I'm going to have cake, I'm going to be super, super careful with it, right? So I might have some if it's my birthday or if it's Christmas or something like that. But I am going to be very respectful of it. And I'm going to be like, okay, like you're done. We're not having leftovers around. Like this is very, very deliberate behavior on my part. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. That's how I would have to treat it as well, because I just have a sensitive brain to sugar.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. So when you were down in Mexico and, you started having all of the special foods that were at the hotel restaurants and the buffets and everything, for you, that was a little bit like playing with the dynamite too, because what you didn't realize at the time is that your brain has that sort of addiction capacity as well. And that's how it felt like it just went out of control for you really, really quickly.
Oh
And
my
that's
gosh, the dopamine
really
that was
common.
going on in my brain for that week.
Oh, yeah.
I couldn't imagine because I'd been, so diligent, like I said before that. And then I just, woohoo, it's my birthday. And I could just imagine, like, if I could look inside my head and see what was going on in with my brain during that time, I don't know, it would be like lit up like a Christmas tree. Yay!
That's funny. Yeah. All right. All right. Well, another reason that I despise the idea of goal weights is because when people are working really, really hard to achieve a certain goal weight, they'll sometimes starve themselves and then they'll over-exercise and then they'll end up burning off their muscle mass. And muscles are really, really important in keeping our basal metabolic rate high so that we can burn calories while we sleep. And so we don't want to be burning muscle mass off while we're losing our fat. And sometimes that can be really, really tricky, which is why I always recommend body composition testing. But so I recommend that instead of focusing on achieving, a certain body weight, that we focus on achieving a certain body fat percentage or on reducing visceral fat, which is the belly fat, so that we're focusing on what's important. We've just been so conditioned by the diet and fitness industry to think about goal weight and calories in and calories out, and our bodies are just not that simple, people. We have complex machines that we're walking around in, and we cannot be thinking in such simple ways about it. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And so, I've become pretty structured and I like having goals. So I just, this time around, or, I'm going to make sure that my goals are different. And I'm going to use these goals that you're talking about, like reducing visceral fat and,
exactly,
and body fat percentage. So it's a learning experience, of course.
It is, for sure. Well, the last thing that I want to talk about when it comes to the idea of goal weights is something called the arrival fallacy. So what happens when we actually arrive at our goal weight? Or let's say we're not focusing so much on our weight, but we have gotten our body fat percentage down and we've gotten our visceral fat down and we're working really hard and we're nourishing our bodies well and we feel like we've arrived. We're wearing cute clothes and we've got our energy and everything is just great. So what happens then, right? Well, most of us end up giving ourselves some leeway. And this occurs again because we haven't developed our new identity as a healthy person. And we're still not seeing processed food as toxic. Okay. But the other piece of the arrival fallacy, it states this. It says, the arrival fallacy is this illusion that once we make it, once we attain our goal or reach our destination, we will reach lasting happiness.
Oh, that's exactly what I thought was going to happen.
Yeah. So arrival fallacy is actually a term that was coined by Tal Ben-Shahar. I hope I said his name right. He's a Harvard-trained positive psychology expert. And the idea here is that we go all out in pursuit of a goal. And let's say in this case, it's getting to our goal weight. And we get this great feeling of accomplishment, but it doesn't last. We thought that achieving our goal would bring us everlasting joy and happiness, but that doesn't happen. So then we're left thinking, well, now what? Okay. And that's a really good question. Now what? Now that I'm healthy, I still have things to deal with every day. It's not going to be a vacation all day long. What then? Right? So remember, we've talked about this on the podcast before. Life is 50-50. Whether we've achieved our goal or not, life is still going to be 50-50. So this is another reason why I despise that term goal weight. Let's not focus on achieving that goal weight. Let's focus on making better choices for the long haul, choices that will allow us to feel better, to be healthier, and to avoid debilitating diseases like degenerative joint disease or heart disease or diabetes or digestive issues or fatigue or everything else that goes along with the disease of obesity. Let's stop the nonsense of dieting for a deadline and focus on changing who we are as people and become people who reject the incessant marketing by the food industry and instead choose to feed our bodies with whole, unprocessed foods. And then recognize that once we get to a point where our bodies are as healthy as they can possibly be and as vibrant as they can possibly be, and we're wearing the clothes that we want to wear, we're still never going to achieve everlasting happiness because life is 50-50. But that's the way to be truly happy and healthy, is to recognize that walking around in a healthy body is way easier than walking around in a body that's not healthy, right? And we're going to be much better able to manage the 50% of our lives that are more difficult if we have the skills in our back pocket that we need to do that. Does that make sense?
Yes. So I just want to thank you for exploring this topic with me, because I feel so much better now that we talked about it. I feel like a huge weight off my shoulders. I feel, I just feel better. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. Yeah. And I hope it helps to know that yours truly has been there too. On a few different occasions.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
It's a learning process, so. Okay, everybody. I think that's all for this week. Thank you for listening. And we'll see you all next week. Have a great week. And by the way, next week we have a very special guest. So be sure to tune in. We'll talk to you then. Bye-bye.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Hey, if you really want to lose weight and keep it off for good, your next step is to sign up for Dr. Angela's free weight loss course, where you're going to learn everything you need to get started on your weight loss journey the right way. Just head over to journeybeyondweightloss.com/free course to sign up. Also, it would be awesome if you could take a few moments and write a review on iTunes. Thanks, and we'll see you in Journey Beyond Weight Loss.